with a few hot topics. Kind of mixed news today in the hot topic bag. Over in the UK, there's still, while restrictions are being lifted, England's full end of the restriction has been delayed because of an upswing in COVID's cases due to the spread of this new Delta variant, which actually is starting to be seen over here in the United States. We researched and they said about 10% of the cases in the USA right now are the Delta variant, and it's an interesting variant. So full vaccinations are recommended for everybody because of the spread. Also over in Europe, the Disney parks are gonna in Paris are opening on June 17th. The French parks can open this week, so that's wonderful news. Legoland over in Germany, it reopened last week, and Disney is getting back. Disney announced yesterday that here in the U.S., the fireworks spectaculars are going to return to Walt Disney World and the Disneyland in July. And they also just announced that both parks have indicated that coverings now are optional and really not necessary in the parks. They may be needed to be utilized in some of the rides and attractions and indoor, but for outdoors, no masks. California, finally, yesterday it was announced that most of California's COVID rules will officially end more than 15 months after they were first enacted. And this means no capacity limits or distance requirements for the businesses in our attractions world, and that the guests will not have to wear masks who are fully vaccinated. Yesterday was also the reopening day at California's theme parks for out of state visitors, which is something that's very important to all of those parks. Here in the U.S., we continue, and around the world, frankly, we continue to see parks wrestling with the labor issues, the shortages of labor that are causing many parks really to alter their operating hours or keep some attractions actually closed. A few examples: Worlds of Fun out in Kansas City announced they will be closed Tuesday and Wednesdays for the remainder of June as they search for more staff. And many other parks in our industry have taken the same measures. We announced in our last podcast that many parks are now increasing their minimum wage amounts to offset the levels of unemployment. And this, of course, is causing other area businesses to feel the need to pay more money as well. This was the case here in Ohio at Cedar Fair, when it doubled its minimum wage last month from $10 to $20 per hour. Chipotle, the fast food chain, popular fast food chain for younger Americans, announced it would be raising its menu prices up by 4% this last week, and they're going to be paying their employees a starting wage of $15 per hour. So parks that are opening at full capacity but understaffed are seeing, unfortunately, extremely long lines. We're hearing up to 2 to 3 hours on some rides and attractions because of the shortage. Some of that will be offset by the capacity issues when that goes away. But this is also bringing about an unhappy guest situation, which has created some unruliness at some parks around the country and around the world. We've been hearing. We're not sure if it's because of the lines, the limited capacities, the heat that we've been experiencing, or just a general pent up, get out and going a little crazy demand. But it's been serious. Six Flags America just opened at full capacity this weekend, and the people were unhappy with the lack of lines, or with the long lines and lack of staff. And several fights broke out there. Same thing at Six Flags Great Escape. And here also at Kings Island, Cincinnati, had a skirmish this weekend when some youths were arrested for unruly behavior. What we're seeing happening throughout the industry and around the world, from the biggest parks to the smallest mom and poppers, are that code of conduct signage is being added at the parks around the world. And I've been told that it's a no holds barred. If the people come in and they're unruly and they break these rules, that they will be ejected from the parks. So with that note, with that happy note, or unhappy note, I would say it is good that we're getting back to uh, full operation, and that certainly is going to offset some of these problematic issues that we're seeing in the industry. So let me go to our guest today. My guest today has always maintained great conduct as long as I've known him, and a wonderful and great sense of humor. Uh, my guest today, of course, is Jim Davis, creator of Garfield the Cat. Uh, Jim was born in Indiana. He was raised on a small farm over there. And like any farm, the barnyard had its share of stray cats. And I think in some of the materials I've read and discussions Jim and I've had, about 25 cats lived on his farm at one time. Jim studied art and business before going to work for on Garfield with Tumbleweeds, which was a comic strip that offered sort of a skewed perspective of the American frontier. Later, Jim debuted his own cartoon strip, Garfield the Cat, on June 19th, 1978. And going to have a birthday here in about 3 days. That's fantastic, and Jim will talk about that. Uh, he originated in 41 newspapers, and today Garfield is now read by over 2,400 newspapers and 200 million people. What an amazing number! He's received the Guinness World Records. They named Garfield the most widely syndicated comic strip in the world. Garfield comic strip fame spilled over into televisions and movies, as we all know. And without a doubt, Garfield has become a national treasure by the man who created him over 40 years ago. He's received numerous awards, Emmys, and in 2019, Jim has moved into sort of a new phase of his life, but he hasn't stopped working. So, with that little bit of background, I want to welcome Jim Davis. Jim and I've been friends for probably about 30 years now, I think, isn't it, Jim?
Oh, yeah, please. Morning, Dennis.
And we don't look any different. That's what's amazing.
How do we do this?
I don't know. Maybe you're drawing that in the strip. So, welcome, Jim. Thank you very much for joining me today on the I'm for Fun podcast. Really is a treat for me, our staff, and for the viewers and listeners around the world who are seeing this and follow you on a daily basis. So, you might want to give us. I just kind of touched briefly, but maybe you want to tell the listeners and the viewers how it all got started, where it came from, and I'll jump in and ask you some questions.
Okay. I grew up on a farm in Indiana. I was asthmatic. And so every time I was sick, Mom would shove a pencil in my hand and it encouraged me to draw. And so one of the things that I learned early on is that my mom was an easy mark for my humor. I could make her laugh. And that just encouraged me to draw more and more and do more funny pictures. So during the course of going to school, I filled the margins of my books with drawings, and I love drawing and writing. And for me, it was a form of expression. I could get my feelings out and everything through the drawings and the comments and everything. So I drew for the school paper, and then I became an art major at Ball State University. And Ball State in Muncie, Indiana, where Tom Ryan happened to live at the time doing the comic strip Tumbleweeds.
Yeah.
Right out of college, I worked for a year and a half or so at a local ad agency, and then I joined Tom as his assistant in 1969 and started working on my own ideas for getting a comic strip. So I tried this bug strip for many years called Norm Nat. I thought bugs were funny, but nobody else did.
Particularly when they're in your hair. Right?
That's it. I hate that. So a syndicate editor said, your art's okay and the writing's funny, but bugs, nobody can relate to bugs. So I took a long, hard look at the comics And I saw dogs doing really well. Snoopy, Marmaduke, Fred Bassett, Belvedere, and no cats at the time. And I thought, if dogs were doing that well, maybe a cat would be well accepted. And having grown up, like you say, with 25 cats or so, I knew cats. And I wanted to work with an animal rather than with humans because, frankly, after 9 years of answering Tom Ryan's fan mail, which had cowboys and we called them Indians, now Native Americans.
Indigenous, yeah.
Anytime there was like a sit-in at Wounded Knee or something like that, Tom would lose papers. And the relationship between Tumbleweeds and Hilda, I was always defending the relationships of the characters, whereas Tom, did everything with great humor. There's no comment, nothing in it. But I thought, I want to work with animals because people are a lot less judgmental, with animals. Garfield would have a lot more latitude too,
Yeah.
So I created this cat. I asked myself, what would a cat do and say? And I felt that a cat would be out for his own, creature comforts. Those three things that we all go out for, and that's food, shelter, and love. Period.
Yeah.
So
You got it.
and so I created that personality, and from there created contrast because humor comes from conflict. If everybody looked alike and agreed with each other, there would be no humor. I mean, you need tall, short, fat, skinny, smart, stupid. You need dog, cat. So so I created this cast of characters, and it took right off. Like you say, June 19th, 1978, and
Wow.
from
Does
there,
it seem like yesterday, Jim?
in many ways, it does. Because I listened to what the readers had to say as the strip went on and kind of let it form. Now, he's a very different character from 43 years ago.
Sure.
He had the tiny eyes and the big cumbersome body and the short limbs, but aside from that, yeah, he had that same heart and that same biting wit that he has today.
How did you come up with he hates Mondays, he loves to
Oh,
sleep, and I'm going to eat all the lasagna I can find.
there were three different reasons for those. I determined as I was watching other people hated Mondays. That's the day you go back to school. It's the day you go back to work. And well,
Yeah.
Monday was another day for me. I just created that and it took off right away. I had him hate a Monday and I got this ton of fan mail. I go, whoa, I've struck a chord here. And so I went ahead and let that be one of his themes, which it gives me another topic to work on for each week, how he feels about food, how he feels about Mondays. Yeah, that gives me something to work with. And so at any
But
rate,
yet there's a continuity there too, right? You
Mhm.
do that to work with, but you got a continuity, but you got these elements that you can kind of feed as you need.
Because people like to be able to depend on a character. They love opening the paper and seeing Snoopy on his doghouse.
Yeah.
For 50 years, he
Yeah.
was
He
on
sat
his
on a dog.
doghouse. And there's something comforting about that. You learn to read, you go to school, you marry, you raise a family, and the character every day is doing the same thing.
It becomes a friend, right?
It
It really,
becomes a
truly
friend.
a friend. Yeah.
That's the trick. Yeah,
Yeah.
I always thought if I could keep the strip going like maybe 3 years, then I would have a career with cartooning because by then people would get to know the character and it'd become endearing because what we do is just hold a mirror to the reader and show it back with a humorous twist. So more often than not, when they laugh at the gag, it's because they're saying, "Isn't that true?" more often than if it's funny or anything. But if we can, hit that note, they identify with the character, that develops affection, and that creates the following. Then so.
Now it's hard for me to remember what I had for lunch yesterday, so
Mhm.
I want to go back to
Okay.
'78. But I have been a reader of Garfield since way long before you and I knew each other, and it's a little hard for me to remember when John and Odie and Liz, when the other and his girlfriend, um,
Oh,
when
Arlene.
Arlene, when they all kind of how they came into play. I always wondered, is John a guy named Jim by any chance?
That's a distinct possibility.
Yeah, I thought maybe.
Because yeah, John's the daydreamer, and he's like I said, created Garfield, very opinionated, glasses half empty kind of guy. So I had to create John, the owner, glasses half full, and always enjoying Mondays, always daydreaming. Tomorrow's going to be a better day, and that's the way I am. The puffy cheeks and everything. So yeah, John was based on me. So,
John, based on you.
and so I
He's a little better looking. You drew him a little. I mean,
yeah, and
the eyes are about the same.
he hasn't aged.
Yeah, I haven't aged a bit.
But so then I created the other characters, and then I did introduce them in intervals. I just did Garfield and John for a while to let people get to know them for a few months, and then I started in June, and in August I introduced Odie. And then it was later on that I brought in some of the other characters like Liz. And so it was basically, I introduced the characters and watched the fan mail. And so one of the things too, I didn't realize when I started it, I brought in John's roommate, Lyman, thinking that a guy and a cat, they weren't going to be able to visit that much. So I brought in someone for John to visit with. Well, as it turns out, Garfield and John communicated so well, I didn't need Lyman anymore. And so I thought, I'll just let Lyman fade away with the strips and nobody's going to notice. To this day, 43 years later,
Yeah.
early adopting 10-year-olds are still writing and saying, whatever happened to Lyman? In which case, I've always wanted to say, don't look in John's basement. But,
That's right.
so at any rate, yeah, it's amazing what people remember, from the strip, what they pick up on.
Hey Jim, as we typically do, I don't think you probably have seen any of our podcasts in the past, but we have questions coming in from viewers, and I'm going to kind of pop a few in on you. Here's one that says, so Mr. Mr. We'll say Jim, how was Garfield? How was he evolved through the years? You mentioned in the appearance he started out with the smaller eyes, and he looks like he does today. Why did you do that? That's from Ellen.
Okay. I'd not planned to do this. I'll show you what the difference is. What happened was there was a newspaper shortage. For one reason, and the comic strips got smaller. So I had to make Garfield's expressive features, like his eyes, bigger. I made the lettering bigger so people could literally read the gags. This is not a drawing pad or anything, but I gave him these, it starts out, all you have to do is look back in some of the old books. And he had these little eyes and little big, like rabbit ears. And here.
We can see it. That's good.
You can see this. And so he was kind of like this. It's kind of sour looking and everything. And so over time, those things that were expressive got larger, like the eyes, like this. And so that really carried the gags a lot better because you could tell what he was saying, what he was thinking and stuff like that.
You got it through his eyes, right?
Got it through the eye. The eyes are the mirrors to the soul.
Yeah, there you go.
And I worked in it with a mirror. I had a mirror beside me too. I was copying my own expressions to help make them more realistic. But so at any rate, he started looking more like this, and so more expressive. Got longer limbs as well. His legs and arms got longer because when I got into animation in early 1980, 81, to get him to move around and get up and walk, I needed to give him longer legs. So those started growing as well.
I want to jump in with a quick story about you while you're drawing and see if you remember this. I'm not sure how many years ago it was, maybe 8 or 9. You came down to the IAPA show in Orlando,
Oh, yeah.
and you and I toured the floor, and we walked around and introduced you to a lot of people. But
I
there was
remember.
one booth that had this machine where you could draw on it, and then up on the wall was that huge screen, and it had a lot of people looking and watching, and the people in the booth who were working for the company, can't remember the name of it, but
Wow.
you picked up the stylus, and you started drawing on the pad Garfield, and you started like you just did with the eyes, and nobody kind of were looking at that point, and this huge 15-foot Garfield starts appearing, and all of a sudden people start walking up and coming over and looking, and the guys in the booth are now watching you, and they're looking up at the thing. This guy can really draw. That really looks like Garfield. And the guy looked over at us and went, and I went, yep, that's him. Do you remember that?
I do. I remember that very well because typically cartooning is not an entertainment medium. I sit here alone and it's very quiet, and I need quiet anyway to focus on the stuff. So it's a very personal, very quiet kind of thing. But to do it like on a stage with people sitting on a big screen, that's very, very different.
We had about 60 people standing around when you finished that, and then
That
you
was
signed it off, Jim Davis, real quick. And I thought that was truly one of the highlights of my memories at IAPA,
that was
of all the
fun.
craziness watching you do that. Here's another question for you, Jim. It says, Mr. Davis, when do the ideas come to you for the strip? Do you get up in the middle of the night and write them down, or do they pop into your mind weeks in advance? That's from Barry.
The ideas that come in the middle of the night are the absolute worst ones because you wake up in the morning, oh, what? then, so actually, I have to, it's like a working meditation. I only write on funny days. Some days you wake up and, everything's funny to you and you're rested. And
Mm-hmm.
so what I do is just visualize Garfield in doing something, climbing a tree, looking out the window. I just watch him. And once I can see him, then I ask myself, where would he go? What would he do? What would he say? If he sees the other characters, what would they do and say? And I watch like a TV in my head. And when he does something funny, I back up 3 frames and just cut it off. So I don't write, I edit. So it sounds strange, but certainly after all these years, it gets easier and easier. It was like one time I was talking to Mort Walker, the great
Yep.
cartoonist for Beetle Bailey.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my concerns, I was just getting syndicated, was about running out of gags. And he said, I always thought the same thing. He said, I always thought about gag writing as walking into a dark closet and taking a gag off the shelf, carrying it out and doing a strip. He said, I never knew how big the pantry was. He said, I never do a point with one day I walked in and there were no more gags left. He said, but don't worry about it. He said, it gets easier and easier as you get to know your characters. They become family. And sure enough, they're easier to visualize, writing's easier, but again, I don't write, I edit. It's just like this meditation. It's like the most fun thing I do because I have to make myself laugh first before I write it down.
Yeah. Does does when the ideas do come to you, when you get something you say, "Oh, this is really going to be good." Do you see a rhythm and a period? Like, my gosh, I could write on this for 2 weeks
I
because you're out there every day.
every now and then I'll hit something and all of a sudden like 6 punchlines come, you know. So I thought, hey, well, let's just keep this puppy going. Actually, this week is Age Week because Garfield's birthday is Saturday. So every year I do these age-related gags and some familiar characters show up like his age-related nightmares. and uh, and at
Yeah.
Christmas, I do that. It's a very happy, very easy time to write for. Halloween, that's fun, doing monsters and stuff like that. So now and then I do. You're absolutely right. Some gags start writing themselves, and you have to,
Just kind of roll with it, huh?
yeah, you roll with it. And also, it what's interesting is you don't want the readers to be able to predict or get tired of the kind of gags you're doing. So it helps to change things up annually. And I also like to write gags in advance. That is another reader mentioned a little bit ago. I do write months in advance, and so sometimes for Christmas, I have to close the drapes, put on some Christmas music, and so so
And Jill comes in and brings you a hot rum
that's
drink.
right, to get in the mood. But then I change that. I get a batch of gags, and then I kind of place them. The sleepy kind of down gag I'll put on a Monday. Really, like a dating gag with Arlene or Liz, I'll do it on a Friday because you go out on dates on
Mhm.
Friday nights. And the weaker gags, ones I really like, but I don't think they're quite as sharp as maybe some of the others. I run those on Saturday because nobody reads the paper on Saturdays. They're
Well,
outside playing golf, walking around.
that's right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. What, Jim, who in your mind, in your business, who would be right now the longest running cartoon character? I mean, when I was growing up, I remember Pogo and Little Abner's and the Little King, and I'm going back 60 years now. Uh,
Yeah.
who would have been out there when you and I were kids? You and I are the same age. That's still out there today, and currently just as popular.
Blondie.
Blondie,
Blondie.
Dagwood
Blondie
and Blondie,
started in 1929 with Chick Young.
Chick
And
Young.
when Chick passed away, his son, Dean Young, picked up the feature. So it's only in the second generation and it's still running today and done with
Wow.
the same great art and everything. It was interesting though, when this first started, uh, uh, Blondie was, let's see, I think it was Dagwood, who was a very wealthy son of this family. He was going to college and everything like that. And
Yep.
then the Great Depression hit, and it was kind of unpopular to be wealthy during then. So they had him drop out and then meet Blondie, who was a dancer of some sort and a dance hall, and the whole thing then started and really took off. But actually, Beetle Bailey's still around. That started in
Yeah.
1950,
Wasn't
and
that Mort? That was,
that was Mort Walker, but
yeah,
Greg
Mort Walker.
Walker is working on his son,
Hmm.
working on it today. And High and Lois from 1952, still
Sure.
around. Again, it's the second generation
Yeah.
still working with those features. BC Wizard of Id, maintained by family
Yeah.
still. As far as original cartoonists, I'm trying to think. I think it might be me. Sadly enough. But
Somebody get him a pillow.
yeah, it's about nap time.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Yeah, that's really interesting. Couple of questions,
Mhm.
more questions are rolling in on
Yeah.
both sides here. It said, next one is, this is from Phil. It says, Garfield has become such an American pop culture icon. What would you say were the primary reasons that he has risen to this level? And the second part of that comes from a gal you'll remember meeting at IAPA, Sarah, with Premier Ride, Sarah Shea. She said, Jim, I'm curious, what's the strangest product you were ever asked to allow to use Garfield IP on? So how did he get to be such a iconic figure, and how did that rise happen? And then,
Yeah.
what's the craziest thing you've been asked to put him on?
Um, as far as reason, the iconic status kind of thing, it came from a conscious effort, a conscious decision when I created the feature to hope that it would go into other countries. Because having worked 9 years on tumbleweeds, I know it had gone into some Sweden and Denmark, and I thought, wow, it'd be great, South America as well. And I thought it'd be
Mhm.
great if Garfield could get into some other markets, not knowing if he would or not. But I thought I'm going to stick with subject matter and deal with the kinds of gags that could easily translate. And so I dealt with eating and sleeping, and everybody eats and sleeps. Also, years from now, I predict that people will still be eating and sleeping. So I stuck with those. And so it made it easily identifiable. I didn't tie them down to a specific location either, as far as residence or anything like that. So he could easily be English or Japanese or anything else. And so as a result, he is very popular in Brazil, France, and
Yeah.
Scandinavia. And he's popular really in a lot of countries, but it's interesting to see where he's very popular. So, well, in India, they have a wonderful sense of humor there. And but some of the gags, it's interesting how they translate as well. They translates better in some languages than others. The Japanese translate literally. There is no stand-up comics in
Japan.
Japan. Because they translate gags like Garfield does his shtick on the fence. He goes, um, I knew a dog who was so ugly, cars chased him. Okay. So it translated in Japanese, and we regularly have it translated back to see how accurate the translations are. And it translated back, I knew a dog with unfortunate looks. So unfortunate, in fact, he was pursued in traffic by vehicles. And the gag was gone. So so I don't do many of those kind of jokes anymore.
Yeah. That's funny.
Uh,
But you had to learn, right? You had to be taught. Here,
As far
here's
as products, I'd
yeah.
say
Yeah.
chopsticks. I had a Garfield chopstick. So it's like, how do you get a cat that fat on something as skinny as a chopstick? And it was interesting. There was one product I thought would never go, and it was Garfield checks. I thought, wow,
Like write a check.
yeah, like write a check, yeah.
Okay.
And I thought writing checks is kind of a down kind of thing, money going out. It's kind of, why, who would want a Garfield gag or Garfield on it? They blew out. As it
Really
turns out, it kind of made something, roots
mundane.
kind of, yeah, kind of interesting and fun as a result. So
Any food products? Any lasagna?
we never did a lasagna. So, but and haven't done many food products. At times we would do private label kinds of foods for specific chains, like like Meyer. You'd be familiar with that here, but that have always done fairly well. And but food is price is so competitive on pricing, it really can't carry the commitment of a license
Yeah.
usually. So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not done much unless you're a Mickey Mouse or something like that that could work very well. And but I would say that yeah, it's interesting to see where he's performed really well and where it's been only average. But so
I
this
remember coming to your office studio in its secret hiding place, the liar, the Bat Cave, and Pam and I came over. My gosh, those 25, 30 years
Mhm.
ago, and when we walked in, you had every SKU of type of item, merchandise, from pillows to blankets to shoes to it
Mhm.
went on and on and on around. I mean, you had rooms full of things that had been already licensed, and you had ideas that were on the come. Have there literally been hundreds of items?
Thousands, yeah,
Thousands. Okay.
because of all the other markets and everything as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting to see licensing at 1978 was not that big of an industry. There were obviously some Mickey Mouse, obviously Disney products.
Yeah.
Snoopy was doing some things, but and now it's not just cartoon characters, but sports figures, actors, musicians, everybody. Yeah, the corporations, corporate licensing like Coca-Cola, and
Yeah.
it's huge business. So.
Getting a few more questions coming in, and I'm going to hitchhike on one of them. This is a gal, also a lady that you met, Charlotte Van Etten. She works with Vekoma over in Europe, builds the big roller coasters and rides and attractions. You and I spent a little time with her in China. I think she was at our table having dinner,
That's
and she
right.
said, Jim, I can imagine that the more known and famous you became, you were quite often approached to work for film studios and maybe even create new characters. Did you always stay just true to Garfield only? Did you branch out?
The I really did. Yeah, I stayed true to Garfield on the and I've done other, believe it or not, comic strips. I've done a strip called U.S. Acres for a few years in the 80s, just for kids. I thought a
Yeah.
farm strip would be fun. And that spurred a Saturday morning cartoon called U.S. Acres, which was part of the Garfield and Friends show. And then I also worked for a little while in Mr. Potato Head. That was great fun as well. And so just for a couple of 3 years. But aside from that, as far as movies and things like that, yes, um, we always stayed real true to Garfield. It was interesting on television because Garfield thinks, it's like Snoopy thinks. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we used Garfield dialogue and he spoke, but his lips never moved. So you always basically you were he was sharing his thoughts with you, even though
Yeah.
John and Garfield can't really talk back and forth. But when it came to movies, when we did that first movie with 20th Century Fox, it was in 2004. Um, the screen was so big it was distracting not seeing his lips move, so we allowed Garfield's lips to move when we started doing the movies.
So he got he got to be a little bit
So that was a little
animated.
bit
Yeah.
of a, yeah, a little bit of a variation.
I know that that you've in the movies and the television cartoons, you've had the great opportunity to work with a lot of different
Yeah.
voice talents and people. I think you told me one time you worked with Bill Murray. Is
Hmm.
that correct?
That's right.
And what was the gal's name? Hewitt, Love Hewitt. What's her
Oh,
name?
Jennifer Love Hewitt.
Jennifer
Yeah,
Love
she
Hewitt.
played Liz.
She if you got any funny stories or any people that I've been with you, and I'm going to tell a story in a minute, when people come up to you and find out who you are and how they react and oh my god. And have you had any kind of situations like that you ran into taking Garfield to them?
The well, I know one of my favorites is every when I was doing Garfield and Friends for CBS on Saturday morning, recorded the voice tracks at a place called Buzzy's there in Hollywood.
Yeah, I
And,
know it.
the so one day I was directing I flew out every month for 7 years, directed all the voice tracks for all of those shows. And I was sitting with the writer, Mark Evanier, and he did the writing for all those and subsequent shows. And so at any rate, I was in the control booth and actors were behind the glass. And I wheeled around and I saw James Earl Jones walk by the door. And I said, Mark, 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 go get him. I said, see if he'd be interested in doing a voice. So Mark came back in and he said, well, he said, Mr. Jones said he had to go home and confer with his 10-year-old son to see if he'd allow him to do a Garfield voice. So at any rate, the next day, um, uh, James Earl Jones was back. And so we asked him, I said, so what'd your son say? He said, well, my son said to not only do the voice, but to do it for scale. Now, I got James Earl Jones to do a voice for a show for $350.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding. I
And
can
it was,
hear that voice booming.
well, I asked him when he got that voice, I said, how old were you when you got this wonderful mellifluous voice? He says, I don't know. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I was a mute. But it turns out he was a stutterer and got bullied in
Really?
kindergarten so much. And you have to understand, here we go. I'm a stutterer too. I was in grade school and stuff. So when two stutterers talk, we get back into the old patterns. We could hardly talk to one another. We both started stuttering. And he said he got picked on so much. He said, I just quit talking. He said, I was 8 years old. He said, I didn't open my mouth until, geez, it was another 5 or 6 years. He said, when I opened my mouth, I said I had this voice. And so
Isn't that amazing?
I hadn't really repeated that story, but I read it the other day and I thought, okay, I can tell this.
Wow,
But
that is amazing.
yeah, so it was fun.
And
It was fun working with the voice talents. Yeah.
wasn't he Darth Vader? Wasn't he the voice
Yeah.
of
It was
yeah,
Darth Vader
yeah.
first. Yeah. Mhm.
Darth Vader first. That well, see how he got his start?
Yeah. Yeah.
There you have to.
I gave him his big break.
You know, Jim, one of my trips in my 50 plus years, one of my great trips is you and I went to Asia a couple of times.
Hmm.
And if you remember a few years ago, Chairman Su at Chimelong uh, hosted an event. I think it was an IAPA summer meeting or some IAPA event,
Hmm.
and everybody was there. And you and I went over, and what a wonderful party and entertaining he put on. If you remember, it was just fabulous. Park was fabulous,
Oh, yeah.
and I was taking you through and introducing you to a lot of the people in the industry that hadn't met you yet, and um, there's two stories here, and there were a lot of Garfield is known and revered in China like Mickey Mouse and Santa Claus and the Immortals, etc. He's at that level, as you know. And when I would introduce you and we'd talk about Garfield, I remember you would sit down. You were gracious. You never said no once in the 5 days we were there to anyone. You drew on the back of a napkin or the back of a bill or the back of a. You'd get a piece of paper, have some, and you'd draw Garfield, and you would give it to these people, and they literally would cry. And I thought, damn it, Dennis, you should have been a cartoonist. Uh, but they loved Garfield and they loved what you did so much. I don't think I've ever seen reactions like that really before. And the other funny story, and then is you and I had a business meeting with some fellow who had contacted us about IP and getting involved. And when we got to the meeting, all he wanted to do was show us photographs of his real live cat, which actually looked a lot like
He
Garfield.
did. He
do,
did.
do you
Yeah.
remember that?
I remember that well. Yeah.
And you and I kept looking at each other like, this cat really looks like Garfield. What the heck's going on? Yeah, we never got on point with him. He just wanted to show you his cat picture. So, but that was a great trip, and I know you've had that reaction from people all over the world when
Mhm.
you meet them. It just that's fabulous. That's warm. Here's another question. It says, "What, Mr. Davis? What cartoon characters did you enjoy the most while you were growing up? What influenced you to do Garfield? You've talked about how you've created him, but what did you see that you liked?
There were several strips I liked growing up. We subscribed to a newspaper there on the farm, and I grew up reading Peanuts
Yep.
and Beetle Bailey, and then High and Lois, and I enjoyed Steve Canyon because he took me places that I never dreamed existed. It was really kind of exciting to read
Yeah.
that, and I
I
also
remember.
liked Wizard of Id and BC because it was just silly. It was
They
just
were great humor.
yeah, just yeah, I could tell. And in fact, I learned a really important thing. I could tell these people were having fun doing what they were doing. It's really one of the tricks, I think, to cartooning. If you have fun doing it, people are going to have fun reading it. Something translates through. You
Yes.
can't fake it. You can tell the old Warner Brothers cartoons. Those people were having a ball doing that writing and animating.
You know,
So
when I've had the great opportunity because of what I do and what I've done, and you know this, one of my closest friends was Bill Hanna,
Yeah.
from Hanna-Barbera. Did you and Bill ever meet, or you and Joe, did your paths ever cross?
Never did. Yeah, there was another uh, uh, generation, and yeah, never had that opportunity. But boy,
Well, he
yeah,
was a
what
lot,
an in,
lot like you, and I mean the talent. They were a team, and they each had their disciplines.
hmm,
But Bill and I were friends literally for 30 years. I had a
wow.
key to his boat in Long Beach for 30
Ah,
years. That's where I stayed when I went to California. And a lot of what you've said and you've talked about takes me back 30, 40 years to things Bill and I would discuss because I was a liaison between the theme parks, the Taft theme parks, and the what were the became the Paramount and the Cedar Fair, half of
mhm,
those parks, and so we were always trying to immerse and inject the
hmm,
studio and the cartoons in, which was a great marriage. We had a wonderful Hanna-Barbera lands and all of our parks. But
mhm,
what you've said is Bill was a lot like that too.
yeah.
He was always up, always happy, and just exactly a lot like you. He was a good guy. Here comes another question. It says, uh, hold on here, got a couple here. It says, looking back, when you would when would you say you knew you had made it? Was there one instance that you said, finally?
Actually there was something early on. Um, it I again I said I wanted to be around long enough so people would get to know the strip and the character. Then I felt that it would sustain itself and I would have a career. But early on, we had one big paper, the Chicago Sun-Times,
Hmm.
and this was started in June and August. The Chicago Sun-Times um, dropped Garfield. They had a budget cut back, so they thought they would drop the newest strip they had, so it would get the least grief. And I thought, that's it. I only had 41 papers, so
Yeah.
there goes 2% of and 10% of the income, frankly, and it was
Sure.
I thought that's it. It's the beginning of the end. But what happened was within the next 3 days, 1,300 phone calls and letters poured into the paper demanding the return of the strip.
Really?
I think, I think probably uh, they slapped the cat lovers' faces, as much or more than people enjoying the strip. I think it was the animal lovers came to Garfield's defense, and they did a big editorial on it. They said we're bringing it back. They had me do a special cartoon for Garfield coming back. I went up to Chicago and did an interview with him, and I thought right then, I thought, wow, 90 days, and I'm here. I said, if they can't drop a feature like that already, as soon as that, I thought, okay, Garfield's maybe has some staying power.
Oh, that's
In
neat.
fact, it was the editor of the Washington Post. They did not pick up the strip because it was an animal strip. The editor said he didn't want to get a strip he couldn't drop.
that's that's forward thinking, isn't it?
You know it.
That's great long range planning. Here comes another one. It says, you've won many awards, Mr. Davis, several by the National Cartoonist Society and some from the state of Indiana. Uh, you've got, as Dennis mentioned at the top, you've got 4 Emmys. Not to put you on the spot, but is there an award you've been given that you're the most proud of?
That would be right there. That's the Reuben. That's the one that the cartoonists give. It's from the peers, and that means the most. It was many years, getting that, but that meant a lot. Yeah, it's named for Rube Goldberg, an early cartoonist who used to draw funny machines, and
Yeah, and somebody'd say that's a Rube Goldberg.
yeah, exactly. And so that's the Oscar for cartooning. So obviously that one means the most.
And Jim, is there is it says there's a society? Do cartoonists get together once a year, once every 5 years with their pencils and pads and sit around and draw or drink or eat or what do they do?
Yeah, there are the Rubens. That's the annual award ceremony where everybody flies in. It's
Where's
been
that
some
held?
time since I've done it. I was going to go last year to Kansas City, but it got canceled
Yeah, sure.
because of the pandemic. But yeah, the biggest fans of comics and cartoonists are other cartoonists, quite frankly. Uh, it's so much fun. None of us could believe we get paid to do what we do, and it's just fun. It's just a bunch of older silly people getting together. We laugh a lot and look forward to it. And so, yeah, it is neat. And of course, it's taking on an all new dynamic these days now with the all of the digital strips and things
Yeah.
like that, all cartooning going online. There are fewer newspapers today than there were, but fortunately, cartoons have translated and moved very easily over to everything online. So yeah, my analog cat's now, a digital cat. So it's that's been interesting. But when I got syndicated in 1978, there were 300 and some syndicated cartoonists. That was it. I mean, we all knew each other
Sure.
by first names. And now, because if you put something online and your mom reads it, you're a cartoonist. There are probably, 300,000 cartoonists. And the thing
Yeah.
that's keeping us all on our toes is a lot of these kids are really good.
Yeah,
and
sure.
and they don't have some of the restrictions that we have as far as well, space and all kinds of things, and to the nature of the strips that will be accepted by newspaper editors and stuff. So their subject matter a lot of times, is a little broader, but boy, some of them are just really good, and we're looking over our shoulders, and it keeps us sharper as a
Sure.
result. So it's just a great community. It's just a very interesting fraternity of people because it's no competition, just having fun.
That would be a fun one to attend.
Oh,
It'd be a
it
fly on the
absolutely
wall.
is.
When I was working with Hanna-Barbera, I had an office out there at the
Mhm.
studio, and every week, uh, nobody thought anything about this. As you will know, each cell was hand drawn and painted, and they flip through them and paint. And there were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these cells, and they would take them out and throw them in a huge dumpster and have them carried away. And I think finally, after maybe a few of the Walt Disney early Mickey Mouses started selling, somebody said, you know, maybe if we got Bill and Joe to sign these, and then they had to come up with a way to authenticate them, and they took a little
Right,
DNA from their hair and put it in the ink, I recall,
right. That's true.
and it was amazing. And I thought back and I thought, oh my God, you could have been a billionaire just on the cells if you'd gone out there, loaded your suitcase every 2 weeks and filled them up. Did you have something similar to that with Garfield in the early days?
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
this?
yeah. We actually we saved all the cells and everything. We've got still cells for sale here and there. You can look online for
Uh-huh.
animation cells, and we animated Garfield on twos. What that means is there are 24 frames in movies. There are 24 frames per second. So we did 12 drawings for every second of animation. Hanna-Barbera animated on threes. So they would do 4 drawings, or I'm sorry, 8 drawings for every second. And Disney operated on ones, of course. They would even do animated holds, it was called. Watch a Disney film, and even if they're not speaking, they're rocking back and forth, they're blinking, they're breathing in and out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're very animation heavy. And so, yeah, so you do a half hour and you've got tens of thousands of pieces of art, which if you match them with backgrounds are marketable.
I remember when Bill Hanna, he was very instrumental up at Cornell University in Ithaca, working with them on going from hand drawn to uh, electronic computer
Yeah.
drawing. And I can remember that people told him, this will never work. It will never, ever work. You can't achieve this kind of level with a computer. Of course, that was again now that would be 40 years ago or more.
Hmm.
So
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you remember that well when that.
I worked with MIT on doing what's called in-betweening. Uh, because we worked on some of our early primetime specials. We actually did the layout drawings in my studio, and that was, Garfield's gesturing here, and then he's pointing to something over there. Well, we do this drawing, we do that drawing. You have to get from here to here. Then it would go to other artists to do the in between
Hmm.
drawings. Okay, in betweening required a lot of art and everything. So I worked with MIT on actually picking points on the fingers and everything and tracking it. Today it's called rigging to get from this point to that point with a computer
Yeah,
rather
'cause
than having someone draw every in between drawing. And so, yeah, that was considered cutting edge back then. But today it's, nobody thinks about it.
axiomatic. I remember when Sid and Marty Krofft, you'll remember them, HR Puff and stuff,
Yeah.
when they came out of the Hollywood and the animation business, and they wanted to do a theme park down in Atlanta, Georgia, which they did, which didn't do very well, but they had the problem of when the wolf was chasing whatever he was chasing, he'd be behind this tree, and then he could move to that tree. You didn't have to see him move, and then he could come out over here.
Mhm.
In a theme park, in a dark ride, in a story, like you're saying, you had to trace him and see him move the whole time, and that was very hard for them to adopt.
Well, a quick movement like that too is seems slow and sloppy if you animate every frame. What Bill Melendez would do, he animated all the Great Peanuts specials, and the early Garfield specials would do a sound effect. He'd have behind one tree, but do a zip sound and have him appear behind the other.
Yeah.
The mind thought they saw it go between, and it would be faster and sharper. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? Hey, here's a question for Bernard Campbell, a friend of ours. He said, Mr. Davis, how was the experience of creating and working on the Garfield ride up at Kennywood?
Oh, that was great fun because we got to work with different situations. It was where we tried to create fear, with the music and with the dark and with the timing of everything, as you started going through. And we got to use things I couldn't use in the comic strip. And that's with the sound and with the music and with the lighting and
Yeah,
everything like
you
that.
did.
And and we got the little setup story to do before getting into the dark ride and everything. So that was just great fun. And as a testament to the job was done on that, geez, we did that. I want to say like late 80s, early 90s, something
I think
like
it
that.
was. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it's still it's held up. It's held up over the years that Kennywood through even changes in management, ownership, things like that. That the ride is
The
as
ride's still there, remains. Yeah.
it still exists. So that was fun to do, and we were working on some at that time leading edge kinds of effects as well. So they've held up.
Well, Jim, I always tell my guests at this point, this is the fastest hour in the week. We have a lot more questions, but we don't have a lot of time.
Mhm.
And I really, really, really appreciate you coming on. You've been a great friend for a long time, and
Had a
I've
good time.
never. We've always had fun whenever
Yeah.
we've talked or been together or traveled on an air. Wherever we've been, we've always had a good time. And uh, Garfield is a testimonial and a tribute to you personally. Obviously, you created him, but people love him because if they knew you the way a lot of us do, they would love you that way too. So you get kind of a
Hmm.
flow through of that kind of love. So
Well, thanks for having me, Dennis. It's always fun. Always a lot
Yeah.
of laughs when we're together.
It does, it does. And we'll have to do it. And please give Jill a big hug for me. I know
I'll do.
she probably orchestrated you getting ready and everything
Oh,
else.
she did. She was my makeup person today.
like Pam and Sean do for me. They,
Boom.
I sit down and you sit down, and then, as they said, they're working on this stuff 4 weeks in advance before
Sure.
you and I get together. So stay with me just a minute. We're gonna talk a little bit about upcoming guests. We For our June 30th, continuing our dialogue on what's happening in the industry, we have three leading representatives from the attractions industry, manufacturer, and supplier sector on our podcast. We have from Intamin Rides, Sasha Sabulka. He's Executive Vice President and Managing Director and a longtime friend of mine. From Dynamic Attractions, we'll welcome Kelvin Tan, Vice President of Business Development in Asia. And when I spoke to Kelvin a week or so ago, he is over in China. So we'll be able to get a great bit of information and insight on what's going on in the Asian market. And from Antonio Zaperla Amusement Group, Valerio Ferrari, their Chief Sales Officer, is going to be on. So we'll have Sasha, Kelvin, and Antonio on all together, talking about what's going on in the industry and hearing important updates. So that's going to be real important. As I like to say every time, and Jim, you touched on this actually. If we don't have fun, how can we sell fun? And that's what you've been about for all these 43 years with Garfield. If you don't have fun, how can you sell it? And you've had a lot of fun. And I always like to add at the end of the podcast, we're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time. And we need to take advantage of that. And that we really do in our industry, and Jim, in your industry, we work in a great industry. You do the same thing. We don't put smoke in the skies, and we don't contaminate the streams. At the end of the day, what we really do is we put smiles on people's faces, and we make memories that last a lifetime. So, Jim Davis, thank you very much. Oh, no. Oh, wait a minute. Who's here? Yeah, he just popped in on us here. Hold on there. Wait. Yeah.
There we go. Cat bite. Cat bite.
You would have thought you would have given me a bigger one.
I win.
You win. So, Jim, thanks very much, and I appreciate it. We'll talk soon. And everybody out there, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the podcast, the I'm for Fun podcast with Jim today, as much as I did. Thank you. Bye, Garfield. Thank you. Time to go eat. We'll see everybody. Bye-bye. Take care.